Greetings, one and all, once again to Exploring Arda, a Tolkien-centered podcast where I am your host, Jackson, and I'll be reading a bunch of Tolkien's works other than Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So I've gotten through a lot of the Silmarillion already, which is really nice. I was hoping to get done with the Silmarillion by the end of the year, and we're kind of getting there. We're about that much through. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through the year finishing the Silmarillion, just because I do have other things, going on in life, and things happened, up and down throughout the months, so it's alright. It's still my personal project, so I get to take my time. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed the thrilling tale of Beren and Luthien from the last chapter, and last chapter I decided to do the whole thing as one video. I was debating whether to put it into two parts, part 1 and 2, just because it's a very, very long chapter for me to read out loud, and it took over, an hour and a half. So that means when I come to Hurin and his deeds, I'll probably be doing that. I'll be doing like a split, part 1 and 2, just because it takes so long, and I guess, I don't know, just didn't get as many listeners as I thought. I thought Beren and Luthien would have been a hot topic, but apparently not. But for this chapter, we'll be going into chapter 20 of the 5th battle, Nirnaeth. Sorry, I was trying to pronounce it earlier, and now I can't. Arnoediad. I'm going to say Arnoediad. There you go. So that is the upcoming chapter. I think just with all the introductions kind of out of the way, because I know some of you might not like all this rambling in the front, so I'll promote everything at the end. So, here we go. We're just going to get right into chapter 20. Here we go. It is said that Beren and Luthien returned to the northern lands of Middle-earth, and dwelt together for a time as living man and woman, and they took up again their mortal form in Doriath. Those that saw them were both glad and fearful, and Luthien went to Menegroth and healed the winter of Thingol with the touch of her hand. But Melian looked in her eyes and read the doom that was written there, and turned away, for she knew that a parting beyond the end of the world had come between them, and no grief of loss has been heavier than the grief of Melian, the Maya, in that hour. Then Beren and Luthien went forth alone, fearing neither thirst nor hunger, and they passed beyond the river Gallion into Osiriand, and dwelt there in Tol Galen, the Green Isle, in the midst of Adarant, until all tidings of them ceased. The Eldar afterwards called that country Dor Fin I Guinar, the land of the dead that live. And there was born Dior Aranel, the Beautiful, who was after known as Dior Eluchil, which is Thingol's heir. No mortal man spoke ever again with Beren, son of Barahir, and none saw Beren or Luthien leave the world, or marked where at last their bodies lay. Yeah, so a little trail from the last chapter of Beren and Luthien. Pretty much they are mortal. Obviously, both of them are mortal now. And obviously, Beren wins. I wouldn't say wins Luthien's hand, but in the end, they end up together. So I guess it's a happily ever after kind of thing. Eventually. That's pretty much it. If you guys want to listen to the actual Beren and Luthien chapter, check out my last video, and then you can get the whole context of their trials and tribulations. So, we're going to go right into the story. In those days, Maedhros, son of Feanor, lifted up his heart, perceiving that Morgoth was not unassailable, for the deeds of Beren and Luthien were sung in many songs throughout Beleriand. Yet Morgoth would destroy them all, one by one, if he could not again unite, and make new league and common council. And he began those councils for the raising of the fortunes of the Eldar, that are called the Union of Maedhros. Yet the oath of Feanor and the evil deeds that it had wrought did injury to the design of Maedhros, and he had less aid than should have been. Orodreth would not march forth at the word of any son of Feanor because of the deeds of Caligorm and Curufin, and the elves of Nargothrond trusted still to defend their hidden stronghold by secrecy and stealth. Thence came only a small company, following Gwyndor, son of Gwilyn, a very valiant prince, and against the will of Orodreth he went to the northern war, because he grieved for the loss of Gelmir, his brother in the Dagor Bragolach. They took the badge of the house of Fingolfin, and marched beneath the banners of Fingon, and they came never back, save one. From Doriath came little help, for Maedhros and his brothers, being constrained by their oath, had before sent to Thingol and remained him with haughty words of their claim, summoning him to yield the Silmaril or become their enemy. Melian counselled him to surrender it, but the words of the sons of Feanor, that's better, were proud and threatening, and Thingol was filled with anger, thinking of the anguish of Luthien and the blood of Beren whereby the jewel had been won, despite the malice of Celegorm and Curufin. And every day that he looked upon the Silmaril, the more he desired to keep it forever, for such was its power. Therefore he sent back the messengers with scornful words. Maedhros made no answer, for he had now begun to devise the league and union of the elves. But Celegorm and Curufin vowed openly to slay Thingol and destroy his people, if they came victorious from war, and the jewel were not surrendered of free will. Then Thingol fortified the marches of his realm and went not to war, nor any out of Doria save Mablung and Beleg, who were unwilling to have no part in these great deeds. To them Thingol gave leave to go, so long as they served not the sons of Feanor, and they joined themselves to the host of Fingon. But Maedhros had the help of the Nogrum, both in armed force and in great store of weapons, and the smithies of Nogrod and Belagos were busy in those days. And he gathered together all his brothers and all the people who would follow them. And the men of Bor and Ulfang were marshalled and trained for war, and they summoned yet more of the kinsfolk out of the east. Moreover, in the west, Fingon, ever the friend of Maedhros, took counsel with Himring, and in Hithlum the Noldor and the men of the house of Hador prepared for war. In the forest of Brethil Halmir, lord of the people of Haleth, gathered his men, and they whetted their axes. But Halmir died ere the war came, and Haldir his son ruled that people. And to Gondolin also the tidings came to Turgon, the hidden king. I'll read one more chapter and then I'll take a break. But Maedhros made trial of his strength too soon, ere his plans were full wrought, and though the Orcs were driven out of all the northward regions of Beleriand, and even Dorthonion was freed for a while, Morgoth was warned of the uprising of the Eldar and the Elf friends, and took counsel against them. Many spies and workers of treason he sent forth among them, as he was the better able now to do. There you go. For the faithless men of his secret allegiance were yet deep in the secrets of the sons of Feanor. Okay, we'll do a little break here. So, obviously, there is war! There's more war! And a lot of the races of the elves and men are trying to kind of form their alliances before Morgoth strikes again, because they saw how damaging it was last time. But they also have this boost of confidence after the whole Beren and Luthien thing, as they know that Morgoth can be challenged head on and actually be damaged, especially when it's Morgoth. He is literally the big bad foe of this entire story. So yeah, that little boost of confidence pretty much made the alliance. Maedhros obviously is, definitely against a lot of the things that they've been doing. Maedhros is a pretty bad dude, pretty bad elf. Even though he's not a Morquendi, he's still a very dark elf on the inside. So, yeah, pretty much their Thingol is very upset, I suppose, because he loses both Luthien, and everybody is pressuring him to surrender the Silmaril and give it away, but he's just like, nah, I'm gonna keep it for myself, which sounds very familiar with, maybe the ring, the Ring of Power, and with Sauron. So, of course, when you're reading through the Silmarillion and you pay attention to what Morgoth does, it only makes so much more sense when you're, let's say, like reading Lord of the Rings and you see the reasoning behind Sauron's actions, because he's the guy who followed after Morgoth. So you see a lot of similarities, for sure. But we're going to go back into the chapter. At length Maedhros, having gathered all the strength that he could of elves and men and dwarves, resolved to assault Angband from east and west, and he purposed to march with banners displayed in open force over Anfoglith. But when he was drawn forth, as he hoped, the armies of Morgoth in answer, then Fingon would issue forth from the passes of Hithlum, and thus they thought to take the might of Morgoth as between anvil and hammer, and break it to pieces, and the signal for this was to be the firing of a great beacon in Dorthonion. On the appointed day, on the morning of midsummer, the trumpets of the Eldar greeted the rising of the sun, and in the east was raised the standard of the sons of Feanor, and in the west the standard of Fingon, High King of the Noldor. Then Fingon looked out from the walls of Silmarillion, and his host was arrayed in the valleys and the woods upon the east of Arnoediad, well hid from the eyes of the enemy, but he knew that it was very great. For there all the Noldor of Hithlum were assembled, together with elves of the Valis and Gwyndor's company from Nargothrond, and he had great strength of men. Upon the right were the host of Dor-Lomin, and all the valor of Hurin and Huor his brother, and to them had come Haldir of Brethil, with many men of the woods. Then Fingon looked towards Thangorodrim, and there was a dark cloud about it, and a black smoke went up, and he knew that the wrath of Morgoth was aroused, and that their challenge was accepted. A shadow of doubt fell upon Fingon's heart, and he looked eastward, seeking if he might see with an elven sight the dust of Anfoglath rising beneath the hosts of Maedhros. He knew not that Maedhros was hindered in his setting forth by the guile of Uldor the Accursed, who deceived him with false warnings of assault from Angband. But now a cry went out, passing up the wind from the south from vale to vale, and elves and men lifted their voices in wonder and joy. For unsummoned and unlooked for, Turgon had opened the leaguer of Gondolin, and was come with an army 10,000 strong, with bright mail and long swords and spears like a forest. Then when Fingon heard afar the great trumpet of Turgon his brother, the shadow passed, and his heart was uplifted. Oh, okay. And he shouted aloud, because this is Elvish. I forgot this was here. Utulien Aure, Aya Eldalie are Atanatari Utulien Aure. Ooh, okay. That's actually kind of difficult. The day has come. Behold, people of the Eldar and fathers of men, the day has come. And all those who heard his great voice echo in the hills, answering, crying, Auta I Lome, the night is passing. Now Morgoth, who knew much of what was done and designed by his enemies, chose his hour, entrusting in his treacherous servants to hold back Maedhros and prevent the union of his foes. He sent a force seeming great, and yet but part of all that he had made ready towards Hithlum, and they were clad in dun raiment and showed no naked steel, and thus were already far over the sands of Anfoglath before their approach was seen. Then the hearts of the Noldor grew hot, and their captains wished to assail their foes upon the plain, but Hurin spoke against it, and bade them beware of the guile of Morgoth, whose strength was always greater than it seemed, and his purpose other than he revealed. And though the signal of the approach of Maedhros came not, and the host grew impatient, Hurin urged them still to wait it, and to let the Orcs break themselves in assault upon the hills. But the captain of Morgoth in the west had been commanded to draw out Fingon swiftly from his hills by whatever means he could. He marched on therefore until the front of his battle was drawn up before the stream of Sirion, from the walls of the fortress of Sirion to the inflowing of Rivell at the fen of Serich. And the outposts of Fingon could see the eyes of their enemies. But there was no answer to his challenge, and the taunts of the Orcs faltered as they looked upon the silent walls and the hidden threat of the hills. Then the captain of Morgoth sent out riders with tokens of parley, and they rode up before the outworks of the Barad Ethel. With them they brought Gelmir son of Gwilyn, that lord of Nargothrond whom they had captured in the Bragalach, and they had blinded him. Then the heralds of Angband showed him forth, crying, We have many more such at home, but you must make haste if you would find them, for we shall deal with them all when we return even so. And they hewed off Gelmir's hands and feet, and his head last, within sight of the elves, and left him. Alright, at that gruesome note, we'll take a little bit of a break. So the war is now starting, and now they're trying to advance their troops the best way that they can to try to further advance the assaults of Angband, but also to charge against the Thangorodrim, as Fingon pretty much goes forward with that. And he's, lo and behold, surprised, Fingon's here. So, no, Fingon, sorry, Turgon's here! He's already there, sorry, I mix up the characters. Turgon comes with a bunch of the Gondolin troops, and it's a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one, as the Star Wars meme goes. Definitely accepted, but this is only because Morgoth is trying to slow down Maedhros and his host in Angband, so, because they have not, sorry, I had a little itch on my nose, because it is cold season now, over where I'm at. But yeah, so Maedhros is stuck trying to get Angband over again, and that's like one of the most annoying places that they've been trying to get over and over again. It's very tough. If Thangorndrim's is like the big station where Morgoth is at, and Angband is his next one. You can imagine how hard both of them are to take at the same time. So, yeah, and after that, there's a frightening, gory death at the end before we get right back into the story. So, here we go. By ill chance, at that place in the outworks stood Gwyndor of Nargothrond, the brother of Gelmir. Now his wrath was kindled to madness, and he leapt forth on horseback, and many riders with him, and they pursued the heralds and slew them, and drove on deep into the main host. And seeing this, all the host of the Noldor was set on fire, and Fingon put on his white helm, and sounded his trumpets, and all the host of Hithlum leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds, and so fell and swift was their onset, that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before that army that he sent westward could be strengthened as it was swept away. And the banners of Fingon passed over Anfoglith and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of that battle went Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be restrained. And they burst through the gate, and slew the guards upon the very stairs of Angband, and Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. But they were trapped there, and all were slain, save Gwyndor only, whom they took alive, for Fingon could not come to their aid. By many secret doors in Thangorndrim, Morgoth let issue forth his main host that he held in waiting, and Fingon was beaten back with great loss from the walls. Then in the plain of Anfoglith, on the 4th day of the war, there began Nirnaeth, Arnoediad, unnumbered tears, for no song or tale can contain all its grief. The host of Fingon retreated over the sands, and Haldir, lord of the Halidin, was slain in the rearguard. With him fell most of the men of Brethil, and came never back to their woods. But on the 5th day as night fell, and they were still far from arid Wethrin, the Orcs surrounded the host of Hithlum, and they fought until day, pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, when the horns of Turgon were heard as he marched up with the main host of Gondolin. For they had been stationed southward guarding the pass of Sirion, and Turgon restrained most of his people from the rash onslaught. Now he hastened to the aid of his brother, and the Gondolindrim were strong and clad in mail, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun. Now the phalanx of the guard of the king broke through the ranks of the Orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother, and it is told that the meeting of Turgon with Hurin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad in the midst of battle. Then hope was renewed in the hearts of the elves, and in that very time, at the 3rd hour of morning, the trumpets of Maedhros were heard at last coming up from the east, and the banners of the sons of Feanor assailed the enemy in the rear. Some have said that even then the Eldar might have won the day, had all their hosts proved faithful. For the Orcs wavered, and their onslaught was stayed, and already there were some turning to flight. But even as the vanguard of Maedhros came upon the Orcs, Morgoth loosened his last strength, and Angband was emptied. There came wolves and wolf riders, and there came Balrogs and dragons, and Glaurung, father of dragons. The strength and terror of the great worm were now great indeed, and elves and men withered before him, and he came between the hosts of Maedhros and Fingon, and swept them apart. Yet neither by wolf, nor by Balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. In this hour the plots of Ulfang were revealed. Many of the Easterlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with flies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went over suddenly to Morgoth, and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Feanor. And in the confusion that they wrought, they came near to the standard of Maedhros. They reaped not the reward that Morgoth promised them, for Maglor slew Uldor the Accursed, the leader in treason, and the sons of Bor slew Ulfas and Ulwarth, ere they themselves were slain. But new strength of evil men came up that Uldor had summoned, and kept hidden in the eastern hills, and the host of Maedhros was assailed now on 3 sides, and it broke, and was scattered, and fled this way and that. Yet fate saved the sons of Feanor, and though all were wounded, none were slain, for they drew together, and gathering a remnant of the Noldor in the Nogrim about them, they hewed away out of the battle, and escaped far away towards Mount Dolmed in the east. Alright, I'm going to do a little quick break here. So this is kind of why the Battle of Unnumbered Tears is definitely one of the top battles. I would say battles. It does say, I mean, this is the 5th battle of the war, but this is like the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, and if it wasn't for like the already difficult setting, trying to like siege Angband and whatnot, and trying to get into Thingol, it's just the last part of it with the wolves, wolf riders, Balrogs, dragons, and then Glaurung all at once. He's just like, let them loose, and it's definitely probably on his end glad that he did, but of course that means like that's kind of like what his power force is. So I guess like from then on they kind of get a gist of like what he has planned for them, for enemies. But the one thing that really cuts deep is that treachery, the evil and treachery of mankind. Of course, it's always the humans that are bound to do that, rather than the elves. I mean, of course, the elves do have a lot of, I guess treachery and whatnot. But yeah, a lot of good people end up dying, and but obviously the Sons of Feanor end up surviving throughout the whole thing. But it's still a very terrible day for everybody, not just the orcs, but the elves and everybody on both sides. A lot of people of note end up dying. So that's I don't know. That's just the way that I guess fantasy war goes. Yeah, we'll get right back to it here. After I make sure that this is set up. Got it. Alright. Last of all, the eastern forces stand firm with the dwarves of Balrogs, and thus they won renown. For the Nogrim withstood fire more heartily than either elves or men, and it was their custom moreover to wear great masks in battle, hideous to look upon. And those stood them in good stead against the dragons. And but for them, Glaurung and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Nogrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armor was not foolproof against the blows of their mighty axes. And when in his rage, Glaurung turned and struck down Azaghal, lord of Balrogs, and crawled over him with his last stroke. Azaghal drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Angband in dismay followed after him. Then the dwarves raised up the body of Azaghal, and bore it away, and with slow steps they walked behind, singing a dirge in deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed more to their foes, and none dared to stay them. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon were assailed by a tide of foes, thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, high captain of Angband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounding King Fingon and thrusting Turgon and Hurin aside towards the fen of Serech. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothmog until another Balrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothmog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. Yep, okay, I'll stop this right here. Yeah, so this is like it was a quick one. Besides that, sorry if I'm kind of slumping on the video. I do not mean to do that. So yeah, this is the death, sadly, of Fingon. It is a terrible but terrifying, and also a I'd say like a mighty and triumphant death. I would say triumphant because it's I don't know, like Fingon's a really great leader. Everybody likes him. He's really cool, and he has to go against Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, which is that's alone is pretty scary. He doesn't end up slaying him, but only because he's fighting 2 Balrogs at once. So it's kind of hard to do that by yourself. So unfortunately, Fingon is slain. Another good leader is now dead in the midst of the battles of, I guess, the battles of Beleriand. So, unfortunately, we will go again because I don't want to end up losing my battery, so I'm going to try to hurry it up here. Maybe a couple more story breaks, and then we should be good. The field was lost, but still Hurin and Huar and the remnant of the House of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the host of Morgoth could not yet win the Pass of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon, saying, "Go now, Lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still no fear in his heart." But Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered it must fall." Then Huar spoke and said, "Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again. From you and from me a new star shall rise. Farewell." And Maeglin, Turgon's sister's son, who stood by, heard these words and did not forget them, but he said nothing. Then Turgon took the counsel of Hurin and Huar, and summoning all that remained of the host of Gondolin, and such of Fingon's people as could be gathered, he retreated towards the pass of Sirion, and his captains Ecthelion and Glorfindel guarded the flanks to right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass them by. But the men of Dorlomin held the rear guard, as Hurin and Huar desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands, and if they could not win back to their homes, there they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Uldor redressed, and all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought in behalf of the Eldar. The last stand of the men of Dorlomin is most renowned. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward, until coming behind the guard of Hurin and Huar, he passed down Sirion and escaped. And he vanished into the mountains, and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnant of the men of the house of Hador about them, and foot by foot they withdrew until they came behind the fen of Serach, and had the stream of Rivel before them. There they stood, and gave away no more. Then all the hosts of Angband swarmed about them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the remnant of Hithlum as a gathering tide about a rock. There, as the sun westward on the 6th day, and the shadow of arid Wethrin grew dark, Huar fell pierced with a venomed arrow to his eye. Wow, okay. And all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap, and the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield, and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog till it withered. And each time that he slew, Hurin cried, "Aure Entuluva, day shall come again." 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive, by the command of Morgoth, for the orcs grappled him with their hands, which clung to him still, though he hewed off their arms, and even their numbers were renewed, until at last he fell buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him, and dragged him to Angband with mockery. Thus ended Nirnaeth Arnoediad, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hithlum, and there was a great storm of wind out of the west. Alright, wow. So, another quick break here as well. So, more death. More and more death. Morgoth is gaining the upper hand, or at least it kind of like feels like it, especially in this chapter. All of this, especially Gothmog. He's something terrible. Definitely something terrible, that he can wreak havoc upon the elves, definitely, and cast fear on them. But the whole thing of Hurin crying, "Day shall come again," is a really, really powerful scene, I feel like. Trying to like hew off the arms and the limbs of the orcs, and he's just like, "Day shall come again," and this is like, just things like that. It's a very heroic, scene that you can picture, this elven lord trying to escape, and it's amazing. Did I say elven? Well, anyway. I'm a little bit lost. My mind's kind of a bit of everywhere nowadays. But I guess, like, long story short, Turgon is like eventually like swayed over by Huar. He's just like, well, okay, fine. So if Gondolin does end up surviving, at least for a little bit, it's still a chance of victory against Morgoth. So eventually he does kind of listen to him. But then, yeah, obviously the tragic deaths of everybody else. I would say everybody else. The whole thing of, Huar dying with a venomed arrow in his eye. Yow! That would... That is just... For me, I don't like gore or anything, but that alone just gives me pain already. It's like... That's a quick death. I feel like that's a quick death. You get it right in your eye, it goes right to your brain, like... Nope, no thanks. But that's just how Hurin dies. So we're gonna do probably one more break after this, and then we'll finish the chapter. So here we go. Great was the triumph of Morgoth, and his design was accomplished in a manner after his own heart. For men took the lives of men, and betrayed the Eldar, and fear and hatred were aroused among those that should have been united against him. From that day the hearts of the elves were estranged from men, save only those of the three houses of the Edain. The realm of Fingon was no more, and the sons of Feanor wandered as leaves before the wind. Their arms were scattered and their leagues broken. Their league broken. And they took to a wild and woodland life beneath the feet of arid Lindon, mingling with the green elves of Assyrian, bereft of their power and glory of old. In Brethil, some few of the Halidin yet dwelt in the protection of their woods, and Hundir, son of Haldir, was their lord. But to Hithlum came back never one of Fingon's hosts, nor any of the men of Hador's house, nor any tidings of the battle and the fate of their lords. But Morgoth sent thither the Easterlings that had served him, denying them the rich lands of Beleriand which they coveted, and he shut them in Hithlum and forbade them to leave it. Such was the reward he gave them for their treachery to Maedhros, to plunder and harass the old and the women and the children of Hador's people. The remnant of the Eldar of Hithlum were taken to the mines in the north, and labored there as thralls, save some that eluded him and escaped into the wilds and the mountains. The Orcs and the wolves went freely through all the north, and came ever further southward into Beleriand. I don't know why I said northward, but okay. Even as far as the Nantathrin, there you go, the land of willows, and the borders of Assyrian, and none were safe in field or wild. Doriath indeed remained, and the halls of Nargothrond were hidden, but Morgoth gave small heed to them, either because he knew little of them, or because their hour was not yet come in the deep purposes of his malice. Many now fled to the havens and took refuge behind Círdan's walls, and the mariners passed up and down the coast and harried the enemy with swift landings. But in the next year, ere the winter was come, Morgoth sent great strength over Hithlum and Nevras, and they came down the rivers Brithon and Nenning, and ravaged all of the Valis, and besieged the walls of Brithonbor and Eglarest. Smiths and miners and masters of fire they brought with them, and they set up great engines. And valiantly though they were resisted, they broke the walls at last. Then the havens were laid and ruined, and the tower of Barad Nimras cast down, and the most part of Círdan's people were slain or enslaved. But some went aboard ship and escaped by the sea. And among them was Iranian Gilgalad, the son of Fingon, whom his father had sent to the havens after the dagger Bragulak. This remnant sailed with Círdan south to the Isle of Valar, and they made a refuge for all that could come thither. For they kept a foothold also at the mouths of Sirion, and there many light and swift ships lay hid in the creeks and waters, where the reeds were dense as a forest. And when Turgon heard of this, he sent again his messengers to Sirion's mouths, and besought the aid of Círdan the shipwright. At the bidding of Turgon, Círdan built 7 swift ships, and they sailed out into the west. But no tidings of them came ever back to Valar, save of one, and the last. The mariners of that ship toiled long in the sea, and returning at last in despair, they foundered in a great storm within sight of the coast of Middle-earth. But one of them was saved by Ulmo from the wrath of Osse, and the waves bore him up, and cast him ashore in Nebrast. His name was Voronwe, and he was one of those that Turgon sent forth as messengers from Gondolin. Alright, another quick break before we end the chapter, because this is a little shorter, thankfully. And so, yeah, pretty much it's kind of like the nearing of the end of this, I guess, the whole reactions of the battle, all of the losses, all of the turmoil, and the death. Pretty much all the orcs are running free. They're trying to, I would say, like, running free. They're pretty much trying to locate all of the good folk of Beleriand, chasing the, chasing them down, and some of the elves end up in Osirian, some of them get to have the aid of Círdan, the shipwright, and escape through his crafty boats, which is always nice. And then we get the beginnings of mariners, and a certain one saved from Osse called Varanwe, and there's a lot of things that for the next chapter, which is Turin, kind of like flows into it, kind of like what Baron and Luthien did with this chapter. But yeah, pretty much everybody's running for their lives away from the orcs and the evil beasts that Morgoth is setting forth to roam free throughout Beleriand and kill everybody. That's kind of like his one rule, I suppose. But yeah, so now let's finish the chapter. Finish the chapter. Now the thought of Morgoth dwelt ever upon Turgon, for Turgon had escaped him of all his foes that one whom he most desired to take or to destroy. And that thought troubled him, and marred his victory, for Turgon of the mighty house of Fingolfin was now by right king of all the Noldor. And Morgoth feared and hated the house of Fingolfin, because they had the friendship of Ulmo, his foe, and because of the wounds that Fingolfin gave him with his sword. And most of all his kin, Morgoth feared Turgon. For of old in Valinor his eye had lighted upon him, and whenever he drew near a shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden from Turgon ruin should come to him. Therefore Hurin was brought before Morgoth, for Morgoth knew that he had the friendship of the king of Gondolin. But Hurin defied him and mocked him. Then Morgoth cursed Hurin and Morwen and their offspring, and set a doom upon them of darkness and sorrow. And taking Hurin from prison, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth, and Morgoth standing beside him cursed him again, and he said, Sit now there, and look upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom thou lovest. Thou hast dared to mock me, and to question the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore with my eyes thou shalt see, and with my ears thou shalt hear, and never shalt thou move from this place until all is fulfilled unto its bitter end. And even so came to pass. But it is not said that Hurin asked ever of Morgoth either mercy or death, for himself or of any of his kin. By the command of Morgoth, the orcs with great labor gathered all the bodies of those who had fallen in the great battle, and all their harness and weapons, and piled them in a great mound in the midst of Anfogluth, and it was like a hill that could be seen from afar. Okay. Hod in Ndengen? Interesting. The elves named it the Hill of Slain, and Hod en Nirnaeth, the Hill of Tears. But grass came there and grew again, long and green upon that hill, alone in all that desert that Morgoth made. And no creature of Morgoth tread thereafter upon the earth, beneath which the swords of the Eldar and the Edain crumbled into dust. Alrighty, so, end of the chapter there. So yeah, the chapter definitely ends in a point of darkness and despair, with Morgoth getting that victory, getting a triumph, but Turgon is still out there. And he knew that he's going to be that he has been a trouble, and he will be a trouble still further in the near future. And I say near future because we're getting slowly through the book. Just because that Fingon is obviously, with Fingolfin. Well, it was with Fingolfin at the time, with like allies and stuff like that. But now, of course, Fingon is the king of the Noldor. So that's also a problem too, because any of these kings of the Noldor, they're very powerful leaders, and a lot of the elves listen to them, like actually listen to them. So he needs to take them out the board, but also at the same time, he takes Hurin because he knows that he's good old buddies with Turgon, but obviously Hurin does not betray his friend, his best amigo. And for it, he's just like, you know what, fine, well, I'm going to curse you and your wife and your whole family. And that kind of makes sense because the next chapter is about Turin. So, the pretty much, the whole book that is, hold on a minute, the children of Hurin. I can never properly, there we go, that's pretty decent. Yeah, the children of Hurin. So someday, possibly, I will read through this as well because it's another great story that I love. So after the Silmarillion, we'll probably get into Beren and Luthien, Children of Hurin, Fall of Gondolin, all that fun stuff. Maybe Fall of Numenor. There's a lot of falling to be had. So that is the end of the chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed my narrating, even though sometimes it might be dull, it might be interrupted by whatever it may be. I don't know. Be sure to comment below what you kind of like enjoy about like the show, or about the chapter, or about anything Tolkien related. That'd be really cool to have you guys kind of comment down below. Make sure to like it as well, and tell everybody about it. If you know somebody that really enjoys Tolkien related stuff, especially like history and the lore, and they want to learn more about it, just send them this way, because I would absolutely love it. So I appreciate every single view and listen. So just kind of thanks everybody for that. Even though it's like a personal project, I'll still be trying to upload as much as I can, but it's kind of like on my schedule. So yeah, any help, any listen is really cool. I just love seeing it. So it's just my personal thing, and I never thought I would actually have views. So thanks again, guys. Just be sure also to check out my own fantasy book called The Lands of Arda. I am currently writing the second book. I'm also writing other kind of separate stories, I suppose. Kind of like standalone novels and whatnot. But that's for like a later day probably. But still check out The Lands of Arda. I've built a huge history into it, lore history. I'm trying to remember to write in my language. It's been a long time since I've added to it, but I'm making a whole lot of things for this series, this world. I would really appreciate it if you guys could check it out as well. And then finally, last thing, if you do want to be part of this show, if you want to kind of like have a chat with me about anything Tolkien related, you can send me an email over at thelandsofarda@gmail.com. It should be down below here, somewhere down below here. Just kind of shoot me over an email, and I'll try my best to respond. There's a lot of things going on at once in my life, so it's kind of difficult to like handle a whole bunch of stuff. But I think with that all being said, just stay tuned for the next episode. And may the light of Elbereth be with you all. Farewell!